Oops. Hello, Tsering. Can you hear me?
Yes, Khenpo, I can hear you.
Okay.
Yeah.
So again, good morning, dear Dharma friends, whoever's connected with us. Hokam Sam, Khenchen Pema, Shrab Rinpoche. Welcome, Khenpo Sonam Tsewang, all translators and all participants. We are very, very fortunate because on this weekend also Khenchen Rinpoche will kindly continue the profound and precious teachings on the wheel of analytical meditation by Mitham Rinpoche. So lots of inspiration and tashidele.
Tsering la pecha nin jambe yang to bat tajana tano chi. So can you oh you know Tibetan, thank you.
Tis.
Manjishire prize. Jagar ketu shiren jana guna badra nama tab peketa pari shi yuntin zambo shi save teba chom den den jambar yang la chan cha lo kang lo den den ne den Nyandara namdara sarave Janyandangwan jeryan zara nyedya thongara lewam Kanda zimbe dhanara maraya mantham dongara jizarave Dhonsongwan lambe jandara jayan la rojya yang diyanso Drodharan chandra nyamo nyalo leja jadro dhoran zanje Maharaya mansaran dongharan yunga jenye jandara dhanha Dini hyanda jen sab jen dharasa yonde lezo jarase tavanko Jata jata jenye jen Lalim hansaran jamba yang landam Om arabatan hande, om arabatan hande, om arabatan hande Om arabatan hande, om arabatan hande, om arabatan hande, om arabatan hande Om Narabadhanande, 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 Kadan denje yang long dong ba ye, lo den ba me na wan zeren de song, kan zen da waran den ba ham, jung zen de waran den hai, gwen bo han jam yang chen yen hen, kei miang ban nen tong wa re ye ho, sai jen ben je sai jen, Hen Don Ran, Hera Len Yen Yen De Jen Ban De, San Ye Yen La Men De Pra Yi, Drong Nam Da Yen La Jen Ba Ra Yo, Wo Dram Ga Ra Ran Na Man Da Lam Ben Da Ma, Samanda Sambarana Samaya Aho Sem Janam Jasambanda Loya Zerai Jandava Kian Te Mon Te Baye Chi Jiang Ho Long On Da
그래도 진짜 자다 좀 뭐도 전혀 매도 좀 한번 봐라. 뭐라도 또 고소 그 맞으면 샤도 저도 저 다시 산지 돈 주주니 나니 제가 저 돈지 투자 맞으면 보내 주소서만 제도 소 저도 도리만 가서 되면 놀아줘. 선배도 로그메게 도지 저 두진 담아 거니 저네 제서 선제 강화 저에 통화 배마 가be 샤베 드린다데 연소 정 진도는 매도 뭐라 저는 산소 배제 예대소 뭐 배만 눈에 dollar bien 저 제제 당에서 배제지 저거라고 로그 좀 맞으면 노력을 해니도 저 그게 이제 저 매매 추에 거는 집하고 저 봐줘도 배워줘 근데 그게 저게 이거 배만 가고 저에서 이거 저거 좋아지 니고 저도 용지 냐가 보면 그래 저 저도 맞는 살에 공부는 뽑아도 너도 주제 자정하고 좀 그건 좀 문제 좀 공부도 좀 봐도 되지 좀 하지 나봤다도 것이나 배우고 좀 나만 문제 좀지 연대 손제 그는 연나도 같이 손제 그 사회라 메셔서 완전 다선 조율은 줄어 줄 건다 줄도 그니는 대지 도마주와 공수다 대대외 주는 점에 대해서 건도도 안 되지 제가 이거도 되지 좋아다도 미개는 루아 근저 전에서 봐 통계에도 최종 투여주지 라야다 들어지지에서 먼저 저런도 레진도데 테티바제비 로징으로 봐 순영슬람비 참치를 걸어 가지 조용은 소만 천리추도 제대 라용 저 최집에 주는 손동거이
Once again, after 1 week, we are again meeting here to celebrate the Mahayana teachings, celebration of listening and contemplating on the Mahayana teachings, especially the teachings that is related to training the mind. And therefore, I would like to greet you all with Tashidalek. And before we begin with today's session, I would like to again remind you to motivate and generate the mind of bodhicitta, and also remind yourself of the right attitude of listening to the teachings.
Javasiri Chibatamji, Chibalana by Susuan, Nanje, Tari, then I do Tiba Chibakonza, Kichiba Nonji, Mali wrote to Dunga Dunji, then there was Zos Wanji, Sala, Kovashabi Chedu, that there were Tiba Chibadonga, soon you also learned the entire Chunzu JD. Mali will draw at the Tamji, Tabu consider Chancellor Jiu, Nyobe, Soma Jajiva, Sunsa, Kuno Sata. That you gave so no Joan. Na Mete, Kabutavich, Yelamete, Shadotavich, Yamato, the Tozitavich, and some last one. No chance of Tomatu, Maziva, so last to a total the pound. That Daniel and Nebi Nuji, Chula mentioned, and then also the mother, then you want to induce. Gave she and Pema came into the church, Jimmy Sonojo. My either to the start that December show.
Just as Patu Rinpoche has mentioned that instead of making a mountain of effort in order to accomplish anything, what is most important is a spark of merit, accumulation of a spark of merit, the spark of merit, which is more kind of like powerful than a mountain of effort. So therefore, in order to accomplish our spiritual goals, what is important is the accumulation of merit. When we have merit on our side, then we can accomplish anything. And the most important and most profound means to accumulate merit is to work for sentient beings, work for the benefit of sentient beings. Because Shantideva has pointed out that apart from pleasing and apart from working for sentient beings, there is no other way to please the Buddhas, to delight the Buddhas. So therefore, it's important for us, for those who are walking on the spiritual path, to accumulate great merit. And that great merit can be gathered through working for the benefit of all sentient beings. So here, knowing the condition of sentient beings, that even though they wish happiness, they do not know the causes of happiness because of their ignorance. Even though they do not want suffering, they go headlong after the causes of suffering. Therefore, their intention, their motivation, their wish, and their actions totally contradict each other. So therefore, seeing this plight of sentient beings generate compassion. And just compassion is not enough. We have to do something constructive. So therefore, in order to really benefit sentient beings in a productive way, in a constructive way, it is high time for us to achieve the supreme enlightenment so that we can benefit them, we can lead them, all sentient beings, to the path of liberation and enlightenment. So therefore, generate the vast motivation of Mahayana, the bodhicitta, the mind of bodhicitta, the precious mind of bodhicitta. And after having developed this intention, the attitude of listening should be that we avoid the three defects of the pot. So the three defects being not listening or not being attentive to the teachings, not listening with attention to the words that are being uttered during the teachings, is like the pot that is upside down. And even though one listens to the teaching, if one does not retain the meaning of the teachings in our own minds, then it is like pouring water or pouring nectar into the pot that has a hole in it, because the content will be wasted, because everything will be drained out because of the hole in it. So therefore, avoid the second defect of the pot, which is broken. And then the third defect is the pot which is poisoned, which means that even though we listen to the teaching, we retain the meaning of the teaching, but because of negative emotions, we use whatever we have heard, whatever we have understood, whatever we have retained in a wrong way. So therefore, avoid the third defect, which is the pot which is poisoned. And no matter how much of content you may put in it, they will be poisoned too. They will be stained by the poison. So therefore, avoid the three defects of the pot, and also the 6 stains and the 3 wrong ways of remembering the teachings. So, and then develop the attitude that considering the Dharma as medicine, oneself as the patient, and oneself, being sick of the negative emotions, and the teacher to be the doctor, and the Dharma to be the medicine, and practicing the teaching to be recovering from the illness. So in this way, develop such attitude and then listen to the teaching. The teaching that we are going to receive today is actually the text, the precious text composed by Mipham Rinpoche, the title of which is The Wheel of Analytical Meditation That Thoroughly Purifies Mental Activity, which has the three sections, main sections of virtuous beginning, middle, and conclusion. The virtuous beginning starts with paying homage to Manjushri, followed by a summary of the text in one verse. Then the main body of the text, which has 3 sections, further subsections, and that is how to meditate, the measure of progress, and the significance of the practice. Now, how to meditate? In this section, Mipham Rinpoche points out that the root cause of being born in samsara, is the self-grasping. The self-grasping, when we try to understand what self-grasping is, what is the object of that self-grasping, then the object of self-grasping is the aggregates. When we fail to understand the nature of the aggregates, then we develop what we call the mistaken attitude of looking at the aggregates. And when we have that mistaken attitude, that give rise to self-grasping, and that causes all the negative emotions that leads to the karma or the actions, and that causes what we call the suffering and pain in samsara. So therefore, how do we understand the nature of the aggregates? So Mifam Rinpoche points out the four main sections, the four main factors, four main attributes of the aggregates. The first is how the aggregates are, manifold, how they are not single, the multiplicity of aggregates. And then that's followed by the impermanent nature of aggregates, then the suffering nature of aggregates, and the aggregates being devoid of self, devoid of an inherent self. So when we think that, when we perceive the aggregates to be single, permanent, blissful, and with self, that gives rise to what we call self-grasping, and self-grasping creates samsara. So how to meditate, and so in this regard, Mifam Rinpoche composed another text, a small text, which talks about how to put this mental purification, the whole of this purification of mental activity into practice. And we were reading that text, and that text was kind of like, initially it talks about how you take refuge before you begin with the practice, how to take refuge, then followed by generation of bodhicitta, then making the 7 branch offering, and then the main practice. So we were in the main practice.
다시 붙여 팬도 매와대 가서 용해 줘도 그 주의에도 대들어서는 땅에 산재가 있어.
So the first thing that we need to keep in mind before we do the main practice, what should be the preparation? What kind of mental state should we be in order to make sure that this particular practice in solitude becomes kind of like successful and productive? And for that, first of all, of course, like what inspires us to do this practice is very important. And that is to know that when you listen to this particular teaching about what is the nature of the aggregates and how the wrong perception of a mistaken attitude or mistaken way of looking at the aggregates brings about self-grasping. And that self-grasping, how it creates karma, how it creates the negative emotion, which in turn creates karma, which in turn creates what we call suffering. When we hear about this instruction from our teacher, then when we think about it, then it kind of like help us to generate a deep wish and heartfelt wish to really put this teaching into practice, which ends samsara, which ends the suffering and pain that we go through in samsara. So that kind of inspiration, when it is born in us, then actually when we go into practice, we need solitude, because we can't right now, we don't have that mental stability to be really in a position to practice in the midst of chaos, in the midst of noise, in the midst of busyness of worldly life. So therefore, make sure you go into solitude where there's less distraction, and one can quietly practice without disturbance. And then make sure that you have all the necessary facilities, basic necessities in order to survive in solitude, including food, sustenance, clothing, medicine, and so forth. And then once you settle with all the facilities, all the required causes and condition to kind of peacefully practice in solitude, then make up the conviction, develop that conviction that that without the Dhamma practice, true Dhamma practice, especially true Dhamma practice here refers to working on our negative emotions, working on the self-grasping, working on the selfish grasping, and deep down knowing the defects of samsara, no matter how kind of like good, how prosperous and how wonderful you might experience things that you experience in samsara, and they are essenceless, they are meaningless, because these actually leads to more suffering, this leads to more pain. And therefore develop the deep wish to practice dharma and to end samsara and achieve liberation. And with that deep what you call deep motivation, with that deep motivation, develop what we call the mind of renunciation. And so far we have listened to so many teachings, we have studied many teachings, and we also have contemplated over those teachings, and we have got that medicine from thanks to our teachers, thanks to our own effort, that we have got this medicine like Dharma. But now is the time, the high time, to really take that medicine not just be satisfied with having that medicine, but we need to take that medicine so that the disease that we have, the sickness that we have, can be cured. And this is the time when we are in the solitude to take that medicine. That means to to really practice the Dharma. And when we do the practice as kind of like being advised by Mipham Rinpoche here, we need kind of solitude, we need concentration, we need we shouldn't have like a distraction, because distraction actually disturbs the mind and we won't be focused. And with the intention to really put the Dharma into practice, develop and invoke the blessings of the masters, the blessings of the Buddhas, the Bodhisattvas, the masters who have inspired us, who have shown us the path, and develop that deep conviction to really practice, put the Dharma into practice in such a way that, tears well up with devotion, and we become so emotional in terms of knowing that this is actually the real medicine that needs to be taken in order to cure the illness that we have in samsara. So even though if we are in a solitude and if we are distracted, that won't serve the purpose. So therefore, pull up our socks and actually put our best foot forward in terms of taking that medicine, and that is to practice the Dharma as kind of like shown here by Mipham Rinpoche.
산지 탐지가 돈도 셰도 갈고에서는 다른 집 손지 공부 르모체데 토바샤스 미소 대시 대체도 다리 가족 공이 쉬었다바제도 산지 주받는 좀 간단도드나 산지 주받대 레냐모마니 모데 너시지도 투수 근호베 사초에 말 대소중 산지 제 중앙사비 Riba, that Jones tell her, Nimutem tomato, Dabato, Duhado, Tomba Juiba. There's no Goma Shabo, no Thomas and Jacolone. Duma Shuchibo Chela, Ticono de Kachi, Ronnie to go on Davidson. That to my Madu part of the Minon Maggio said, Cono Sango Chiragacha. The demand. Pema, we watch the core minor region. That long usually do trouble as well. That's also not a man, the Jim was to show you.
And now it's important for us to bring in our mind, bring into our focus that, how we are driven in samsara, how we are forced and compelled to go through all this pain in samsara because of our negative emotions, which are rooted in self-grasping. And try to kind of really understand that the root cause of samsara lies within oneself, and that is the self-grasping. The root cause of samsara is not something outside of us. So therefore, try to make sure that, we really see the disadvantage, all those pain and suffering which we go through being caused by this selfish grasping, and which is the mistaken attitude. And after seeing this, the fault, the disadvantage of the selfish grasping, then it's important for us to in order to apply antidote at the onset, it's so important to think of all sentient beings, and which actually, when you talk about bodhicitta, thinking of all sentient beings, all other sentient beings, this actually serves as an antidote to self-grasping. Because bodhicitta is to think about others, whereas self-grasping is to think about oneself. So therefore, the development of bodhicitta at the beginning of each and every session is so important that that will help us make the practice, whatever practice we do, successful. So make sure that we don't actually forget this bodhicitta at the beginning of the session, developing it, and make sure that this always is there when we are practicing this session. So that's important. And then once we have developed bodhicitta, then when we continue, when we do the session, the whole of the session becomes productive and it serves as an antidote. And then the main practice kind of includes, just as you have studied in the root text itself, that how we kind of like try to understand the nature of the aggregates being manifold, being multiple and not single, how they are impermanent and not permanent, how they are suffering in nature and not blissful in nature, and how they are devoid of self and not with self. So therefore, the main practice is quite simple as mentioned here in the text. So I won't go much into detail because we don't have much time.
Oh yeah, that any Thoman Dundo wrong Kana Chawa Jions. I got the Dokamba Sonsan, Dokamba from the country, the 2 the shot. The chat Tibu Pena, Sonja Dembara, the Sunjari, Sonja John, get to the Dombas of the Loshima to Dabajama, the Domasho, the short woman. Ready won't get Domasho. Tom the short song about Jazia twins, the chat Chiba. Then see many Kona Charo, you don't want it. Pouring more than poor Kona, easy to some laws. Hey, so you know just the Chavachi, you know what Chavacheta made. And to do the Roshi by Jendo Ocean, that the Roshi was the pearl about me wrote the shit I do. Shadows Sagura trade about Tikashari. The Tangelion, the Matangel, the Roshi was said, the son of Nayo, Misashi Jagu. Conda wrote John the Chabi, Kidu, Yote, Lutella, me. Sunday, Tashi on the Papa, Sha, Ruba, Tom. Then only you do. Lord Jamalas of a Tanu. The name Koban the Karaz Kazichu Kazish. Last was so no machine. Sheba Wina, Shivan, the double Shivi, the Nova Sams, the Nova Karin Zada, Chavachi, Yuta, Chashika, Sunday. That is no about. Shrab the Tashi Tony, Sonatus.
So the main practice begins, and that is the first one is to reflect on multiplicity of aggregates. To begin, imagine that someone to whom you feel attached or the object of your practice, whoever that might be, appears before you. So here, it's important to know that in desire realm, the prominent desire, of course, there are different types of desires, but the prominent of them is sexual desire. And because of sexual desire, as you know that those, like even those who have not only just lay people, but also those who are ordained have vows of celibacy, fail to keep that vow because of sexual desire, not being able to control it, not being able to deal with it. And then that leads to, even after many years of having preserved that vow, fail to preserve it throughout their life. So, and that ends up being disrobing and giving up their vow. So these are all because of what we call the sexual desire, a male kind of attracted to female body and female attracted to male body, and so forth. So therefore, first we try to understand how the attachment arises and how we deal with it. So imagine that someone to whom you feel attached, or the object of your practice, whoever that might be, appears before you. Then consider that they are dissected like a corpse in a channel ground, beginning at the right eye socket and continuing with the skin, flesh, bones, and internal organs. Now here, what is important to know is this particular, metaphor or example given here, that dissecting a corpse in a channel ground applies to like the Tibetan tradition of sky burial. As you know that when Tibetans die in Tibet, the main practice is to feed the vultures, feed the vultures off from the corpse, cut the body of the pieces of the corpse, and then they feed the vultures, and that's the practice. And so this might not apply to like if it is cremating the body or burying the body or whatever. So therefore, consider that they are dissected like a corpse in a channel ground, beginning at the right eye socket and continuing with the skin, flesh, bones, and internal organs. Consider the smell and other features of each part as it is dissected. So the mental dissecting mentally, imagining through imagination, bringing the object of attachment right in front of you and trying to dissect the body of that particular object of attachment or desire, dissecting it one by one, beginning from the eye, then continuing with the skin, flesh, bones, and internal organs. And as you do so, also try to think of the smell and the other features as it is being dissected. Continue the process mentally dissecting each of the 36 impure substances right down to the level of the subtlest particle, and develop a deep understanding of the inherent flaws of the physical body. What is important here when we are attached to the physical body of oneself or others, why this desire arises because of the mistaken attitude of looking at the aggregate. Because the body, we take the body as one single entity, whereas the body, when it's being dissected, we come to know that they are not single, they are multiple. The body has many parts. And when we, in that process of dissecting, what happens is the very process of dissecting actually enable us to teach the mind, which actually is very much fixated upon singularity, to teach it that the object that we desire is not singular, it's multiple, it has many facets, it has many parts. And when we dissect it to the most subtle part, just as Shantideva pointed out, when you dissect the body one by one, the 36 impure substances to the most subtle of particle, you won't really find the singularity as the singularity there. You know, when you try to dissect it to the minutest particle, you don't find any substantial object that we are attached to, that we are so much that we so much desire. So therefore, this exercise actually help us to develop a deep understanding of the inherent flaws of the physical body. That means that the body is not singular, that the body is not pure, because we find that it is made up of 36 different types of impure substances. When this exercise is done, what actually help us is it helps us to educate the mind, which is mistaken and which actually grasps the body, the physical body, to be single, to be pure, and make it understand and realize that the object that it desires so much, that it is attached so much, is not singular, it is multiple, and it is not pure, it is impure.
Lucia, I think I do Chabi. Look, Coron, Dasson, Tona, and not easy. Johnny, usually, Lucindo, Lucia, got a call you, Krugomati, Shad Ruba, Zasoba. Tomato Soba, Sawa, the Sai Conny, Trade the May Conny. Can I do Ulos for the own Conny? Try to treasure, let me chat the tree con. Made the Nala sub Nala Sobin. Don't be shot the Nogacon. So that Joanna come so Sheila. That Seni to Majiba, Tate by his other, such men was registered cause, Sally don't want Seni Tadid. Teo Coron, no say, chick to never jet anything. Got that you to shut out the mother chicks and paint to never. Chicks no to they do, and a good to buy. Marble not sage to so what I will lose. Nimble they just told you so. Chui boa double. Seni la to Shrab, Taje Donde, make those good make our stars. Remind that sonatone, Lord does the cause with Sana, two gens, Yamajan, me about sonatone. Turn out that you say nearby mays, to say what that tar into as a command double. Choose second double. They come to the children's house on the time the Kama, Chini Kazeto, nearby mays, wrong with the con, some massage pado. This on the tongue. That Pumbung I said a zoo Pumburo, so Chabajo you tell him. You want to see what are gums.
Then in the same way, divide the flesh and bones of the body according to their elemental components, solidity as the earth element, warmth as the fire element, breath as the wind element, blood, urine, and so on as the water element, and cavities as the space element. Just as we dissect the body and to the minutest particle, as we have done, we divide the flesh and bones of the body according to the elemental components. Elemental components means because our body is made up of 5 elements, and the 5 elements are, out of these 5 elements, the earth element is something that everything that is hard, which is in our body, like the bones that is hard, is made up of. That hardness is what we call the earth element. Then the body has warmth, heat, and that is the fire element. The breath, the inhalation and exhalation that we do is the wind element. And then in the body, we have blood, urine, pus, and so forth. All these are what we call the water element. And the cavities that we have, cavities in the nose, in the ears, and as well as in the internal organs, and that is what we call space element. These elements with their different characteristics are combined and contained within the body like a mass of poisonous snakes. Now, what is important is to know that these 5 elements, the earth, the fire, wind, water, and the space, all these 5 elements have opposite characteristics. Like if you take the example of earth element and the wind element, so the earth element has solidity, firmness is there, whereas the wind element, it's like it's fluctuating, it's moving, it's light, it's not hard, but it's light, So therefore, in the same way, the water and the fire, the water element, the fluidity, the wetness, and the coldness is the water element, whereas the fire is the warmth, the heat. So in this way, the 5 elements are, in terms of their characteristics, they are contradictory, yet they have come together, and as a result of which the body is formed. So the 5 elements with opposing characteristic coming together is just like the 5 poisonous snakes in one place. So the 5 poisonous snakes, when they are together, they will definitely kind of like, we always try to harm each other, right? In the same way, our body is also made up of these 5 elements, which are contradictory, which are opposing in nature. Direct the eye of your intelligence to the body's hollowness or mass-like character. So when we do this contemplation, this meditation, then we really come to know that the body is a hollow, like a hollow. It's just like a mask. When we try to pierce it, what we see outside and what actually is inside are 2 different things, and therefore like mask-like character. The pace and duration of the session are not predetermined. Meditate until everything arises clearly in your mind. So now here the question comes like, how long should we meditate on it? And how fast should be our pace and so forth. So that is not predetermined because it depends from individual to individual. Like one can meditate for 1 minute, like 2 minutes or 5 minutes or in half an hour or 1 hour and so forth, depending upon our capacity. What is important is meditate until everything arises clearly in your mind. So it's important that clarity is there. Like we really see like what as mentioned here, we really see the multiplicity of the aggregates, especially right now we are talking about the form aggregate or the physical body, which is the main object of attraction, object of attachment or desire in the desire realm.
제가 레도 내도 세말라스와 좋은 좀 참이 루리 수지도 뿐만라 지금 개비 단지 무엇이 공사돼 소소 시신 내는 레로 내소 내 내소 시 또바 인도 부모가도 컨점지도 제제중에 로를 사진 연례 부모도 여도 소나 소소 시신 대리 공원을 씹어채나 다 가지고 건디 쉬어 타버도 도마이 마도 마도 동아바이 마 다음에 바이 마 시반데도 풍보를 제다 옆에 도마니 이제 소바지 논 차도를 씹어자데 내 도모비 대다는 도모다 철거집이 요 이동하는데 zul다고 도고 도제 동안 잡대 로또베 건세 조도고 또 부모가 있는 zul도바 셰바데 먼저고 있어
The sutras say that when grains such as rice, barley, and corn are placed together in a pile, a skilled person may separate them by identifying what is rice, what is barley, and so on. And in the same way, by dividing the constituents of the aggregates and analyzing each one in turn, it is possible to understand how they are a multiplicity, how they are multiple. So the example or the metaphor that is being used in the sutras that if rice, barley, and corn are placed together, then a skilled person who actually knows about grains will definitely separate them and will kind of will be able to distinguish what is rice, what is barley, and what is corn. And the person will be able to identify each of them without kind of mistaking. So in the same way, by dividing the constituents of the aggregates and analyzing each one in turn, it is possible to understand how they are multiple. So taking the example of the rice, barley, and corn, in the same way, when we try to analyze and dissect this form body, the body, then we'll come to know that, okay, within the body, the internal organs, the internal organs, and others like which actually makes up the body, we will come to know that there are many things inside the body which are separate, which are different from each other, and hence we'll come to know that this is not one kind of single kind of like entity. It is multiple. So first consider form in the way described. So out of the 5 aggregates, we start with the form body, which is the object of attraction, the object of desire, the body of others or of oneself, which actually when we perceive the body as single and is as pure, then as a result of that attraction, as a result of that desire and attachment arises. And that object of desire, when uninvestigated, when we do not investigate but take it as it is, that actually gives rise to desire. But when we investigate and try to find out what actually is made up of, what the object of desire is actually made up of, when we do the investigation through dissecting mentally, then we'll come to know that they are not single, but multiple.
이 도지에 싸고 좀 산나 다들 가보네 다 부모 제단 바꿔야 돼 저기 주사치 대 부모가 있노네 죽지부터 변비 차를 맞으지 이거데 노시를 봐서요 되는 소라 동보 소위 부모도 시부모도 노시 부모 이제 세르바 소위 부모 대라양 소바 대와 소바 동아 소바 동형 씀 대화 라용 다들 소바 대화 제제가 찐 뭐라 맨날 미시 조조조번 통에 잡았지와 ran 님발 되니 잡았지와 다 소고는 제 심보를 되니 잡았지와 로 나발 되니 잡았지와 리전 점보나서 봐 여기 이동하다서 봤더니 그랬더니 도마이 맞도 이제 찐 말이었어 도마다면서 대레리 차랑 노세서 개진하지라서 봤던 같이 맞아도 찌면서 타대고 여기 쓰지 소바 코랑요 도마를 맞아도 롱워 좋아지면 도마 세지 대셔시고 세
Then when you have gone through the contemplation once clearly in this way, consider sensations which are divided into pleasant, painful, and neutral. Even pleasant sensations have further subdivisions according to whether they arise from seeing a pleasant form, hearing a pleasant sound, and so on. Analyze and dissect these sensations according to their multiplicity. Now, once we have clearly meditated that clarity on the form body as multiple, when this clarity is actually developed, then we move on the conceptual thought to move on to the next object of meditation, and that is the second aggregate, that is sensation. Now, out of the 5 aggregates, we need to know that form, out of the 5 aggregates, form is the form aggregate. The first aggregate is made up of matter, whereas the other 4, sensation, perception, formation, and consciousness, all these four, like all the sensation, perception, and consciousness, and a part of what you call the formation, all these are made up of what you call mind. So matter and mind, we try to divide the aggregates into matter and mind. And the 4th aggregate, which is formation, also includes the conditioned phenomena which are neither mind nor matter, like time. So once we finish the contemplation and investigation, reflection on the form aggregate, then we move on to sensation. Now, when we talk about sensation, even though we consider, we feel, we perceive sensation to be one, but if you go further and try to investigate what does sensation contain, what does it comprise, then we come to know that sensation can be divided into pleasant sensation, painful sensation, and neutral sensation. And even for pleasant sensation, it is not one particular sensation. It has many facets, like when we see a pleasant form, a nice or a wonderful or beautiful kind of form, then that gives rise to pleasant sensation. And also at the in the same way, when we hear a pleasant sound, like a music, a melody, then it gives rise to pleasant sensation. And that's also sensation, pleasant sensation. In the same way, and then when we smell something pleasant, and when we taste something pleasant, delicious, and when we touch or come to contact with something smooth, right? So this gives rise to pleasant sensation. So accordingly, based on these different sensory perceptions, we can have different types of pleasant sensation. In the same way, painful sensation also can be divided further, and neutral sensation also. So therefore, we come to know that through this analysis and dissecting the sensation, then we come to know that the sensation is also multiple. It is not singular. It is not a single entity. It has got many, many, many types within it.
Zombie doshi, Miami doshi, Pamin doshi, Saswan, that's what tongues. Shrab Yuchi, the Tony, Pena, Kawan Zimidoshi, Puma Suju, Pumandoshi, Tanto is that, Tao Human doshi, Lombo the Tones, Lombo and Domindoshi, Chiba doshi, Pimen doshi, Pumodo, Manning doshi, last one Serbia. 도시 나 저봐 도시 코로나 타소를 맞도 저 롱고 저봐 저 매월 저 도시 미치바 뭐 유비 도시 부모 내용 딱 가서 거기 집에 시에서는 논차 되고요. 나서부터 도마시부터 나 줘봐. 도마오 년도 나도 도마이 맞 세기도 제바 샤스 대다 로시네 대녀바 제바 샤우스.
Then afterwards, consider perceptions. Now, after the contemplation or investigation on sensation and coming to know the sensations are a multiplicity, in the same way, perceptions too are multiplicity. There are various forms of perception, including good, bad, and neutral. Okay, when we encounter something, then we develop what we call perception. Okay, this is good, and this is bad, and this is neutral. And these are all different types of perception, as well as all the various forms of perception classified according to their particular object, be it a pillar, vase, horse, ox, man, woman, or whatever. So when we see a pillar, then we develop that perception. Oh, this is a pillar. And then when we see a vase, horse, ox, man, woman, transgender, whatever we see, then we develop that perception, and that we give rise to this perception that this is a man, this is a woman, this is a transgender, and so forth. Develop conviction that the aggregate of perception too includes a multiplicity of phenomena, given that there are so many different forms of perceptions. So just as we went in detail when in the main text by Rinpoche about different perceptions. So from that we understand that perception also is not a single entity. It includes a multiplicity. It is multiple. It is not confined to one entity.
That's how Jesus. 차지 도시 부모 잡아라서 다 부모가 있는데 저희 부모 저희 부모 도시 부모 손자서 다 집안 도시 부모 대한 존재 많이 도시 니 산도 수마든 봐 수마든 존재는 많이 가서 거기 주비 산중 되라 손대 도시 존재 많이 본 도시 시야에 가서는데 demin düzeceği da din onu sanjung sezon normal sonje bir sanjunga saji din onu soy 부모든 도시 부모는 노가탄에서 부모가 대 많이 봤다 집 제구요로 와. 대 마도베 산중서 산서 조산지 산중 대고서 건도 가도 유행하라서 봐. 산중 또 리바라서 리바 컨트롤 라소바 not the last.
So after the reflection and investigation on perception, then we move on to the next aggregate, which is the formation. In the formation, we have two types of formation, and that is concurrent formation and non-concurrent formation. So concurrent formation are those that are related to mind and mental states. Mind and mental states. So the mind and mental states. So in Buddhism, especially in the Abhidharma of the foundational vehicle, and we have 51 mental factors or mental states. So out of 51 mental states, the two strongest of them are the sensation and perception. So that's why they are being kind of extracted from the 51 mental states and being counted as aggregates, because these are the two most powerful mental states, sorwa and dushe, which is sensation and perception. So remaining 49 are in the concurrent formation, are included in the concurrent formation. So 51 of them. And then in the non-concurrent formation, then we have a phenomena that are neither mind nor matter, just like time, for example, like time. So therefore, after this, consider what is known as the aggregate of conditioning factors. Since conditioning factors associated with mind include various mental events, with the exception of sensation and perception, such as attention and contact, they too are a multiplicity. For example, there are several virtuous mental states, including faith and conscientiousness. So out of 51, excluding sensation and perception, which are counted as one of the two, as two of the aggregates, and then we have the mental states also like are not single but multiple. Like for example, we have five virtuous mental states like faith and conscientiousness. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
나도 집에 토마토 스페나 개비선중 대발 동 모사 시바동 체유발라서반 개비선중 토마유 메개비선중라고 마데바동 모사메바동 차동선도 차도 제동 때문 나자 차도라서반 선데 때 냠냠 예술라서반 선데 릭무시바 토마유라 대농은 도샤답을 찔러요. 대착과 대농게 착과도 마샤바다고 로 찔러요. 유럽진의 타제요. 유럽진의 타제 놈이 시나요. 세매번 주에 있나. 내 두진 두지 이제 부부. 근데요 주도만 나토바고 녀도 시대. 너마지 시해야 돼. 대전자. Anybody? Sandeep? Huh?
Now, within the 51 mental states, there are also, for example, there are several virtuous mental states, including faith and conscientiousness. There are also several different forms of non-virtuous mental states, such as lack of faith and lack of conscientiousness, as well as attachment and aversion, and so on. So the root kind of negative emotions and root negative emotions there are 6 of them, and then we have 20 secondary, not the primary but secondary negative emotions, and there are 20 of them. Even within a single mind of attachment and non-attachment, there are particularities of object. So in terms of object, there can be different types of attachment. In terms of time, in terms of features, so that the subdivisions are beyond limit. Conditioning factors thus consist of a multiplicity of various phenomena. So this is related to the fourth aggregate of formation.
Oh yeah. That any not bubu. Tandi none temido jedi jedo sabjama jedo lyunje kalsa. Temido jeda temido je kalsa dedinde benshi ni koyo 많이 빈 누지 있어요. told my young the ship made no do last one. Them near Chachi, you are. On that, don't draw the Pembrokeshire. Saji Bashiba, then you call him even to see Tonji, that them into do. They don't do Madu watch what you may. They know Madu choose Mason, Shivachi. That any Pumonga, not see Pumoja, not see Lao. Making no Bashibani, Zula Teddy, Mishi Yozu, they make no Bashiba. Dra de Navi no Bashiba. They children to the each no Bashiba Padu, no Bashiba so true. They level no Giva. Tomayo some days. And about making Mishi Tabla, Woman's Mishi, several Mishi, covers the Mishi last one. You to Kalo last one, if I tell them. Mishi Tateba, Rimijiba, Toma, Tatsuba. That machine sounded this Saba non, nobody shit. That is between them, the door to Dolium. Zulu Wandibanza, so I tree to region to see Michu Dawati, the jet on the Chushiji, nobody but Jumata, Nimini Kasato, that they make the door is Zuko. Kaji don't know what do what happened. So I did chew down. Chew this one, what don't you? The sheet and it, Mijus chew my able to chew one down. Leg about the jet, not it, don't do it, then to the Chuji with that. The Kela Shinton Tono, Papa Bodman, no, he will never say one. On that day, double. Nobody Shiva on it, Juan Malata, Juan, David Chivolas about it, Juan Khenchen, Madon. Even so, the Tenny, Chiba Venus was what Maroja, Germany was it. Or that day, double. Joseph John Duji Tom Jetta, that was Roger Madawa, Kasato, Shiba Tar, around the Teta, a Yimbi, Lola Nishi, Chibaji, Chibanas. They Maji want to Chiton Nijipado. Nobody don't do it.
So the fourth investigation and reflection on the fourth aggregate, which consists of the formation. And formation has two types, that is concurrent and non-concurrent formation. And Mifan Rinpoche here explains in detail the concurrent formation, which are related to mental states or mental factors. And I think non-concurrent formation is not mentioned here. Maybe he missed it. Non-concurrent formation are those phenomena which are neither conditioned phenomena that are neither mind nor matter. Now, so we can classify conditioned phenomena, actually the conditioned phenomena, into three types, and that is mind that is mind and matter, matter, and those conditioned phenomena that are neither mind nor matter. So non-concurrent formation belongs to the category of the conditioned phenomena that are neither mind nor matter. Now, how many are there? So in Abhidharma Kosha, the Abhidharma of the foundational vehicle has 14 types of non-concurrent formation. And in the Rigpa Wiki, it's mentioned that like acquisition, for example, acquisition, dispossession, same status of similar class, perceptionless absorption, perceptionlessness, absorption of cessation, life faculty, birth, abiding, aging, impermanence, names, words, phrases, and letters. So letters, for example, are neither mind nor matter. And then in the Mahayana Abhidharma, which is Asanga's compendium of Abhidharma, there are 10 additional non-concurrent formation. So in short, these are phenomena that are neither mind nor matter, but they are conditioned. They are based on, they are conditioned. They can change. They're subject to change, and they are based on either mind or matter, even though they are not mind or matter. And then after the after investigation of the fourth aggregates, now we move on to the fifth one, which is consciousness. Consider then how there are 6 types of consciousness, from visual consciousness through to the mental consciousness, visual consciousness, oral consciousness, and so forth, right? So to the mental consciousness, and how each has its own subdivisions. Visual consciousness, for example, includes the apprehension of blue, apprehension of yellow, and other colors, other major colors and minor colors, or the main colors and the branch colors. Analyze clearly how these constitute a multiplicity of different types. So in support of this particular investigation, there's a quote from Sutra. A sutra says, "Form is like a mass of foam. Sensations are like bubbles on water. Perception is like a mirage. Formations are like a plantain tree, and consciousness is like an illusion. So says the kinsman of the sun." So mass of foam, when there's a mass of foam, it is just a mass, but a form is like, it's kind of transient, it's fragile, it is fluctuating, it is never substantial. Sensations are like bubbles on water. So bubbles on water appear and cease to be the next moment. So in the same way, sensation are also like that. Perception is like a mirage. Mirage can be delusive. Now, when we see a mirage and we think that there is water there, and when we chase it, we don't find there. So that's like perception. Formations are like a plantain tree like banana tree, which actually gives fruit only once, and the body of the trunk of the banana tree is kind of made up of many skins. When you try to peel the skins off, then you won't find any essence in there. So that is, formations are like plantain tree, and consciousness is like an illusion. Illusion is created by the magician. Like magician uses pebbles and pieces of wood, and when the magician do some mantra, then illusions are created. So in the same way, consciousness is also like an illusion. So says the kinsman of the sun, referring to the Buddha. When you develop a special certainty that this is how things are, rest in that state without becoming subject to forgetfulness for as long as you can. When the impression fades, rather than seeking to prolong it, turn instant to the contemplation of impermanence. Now, after the contemplation on multiplicity of the 5 aggregates, once we have done that, and when this impression, the mental impression, fades away, that perceives the multiplicity of the 5 aggregates, then we move on to the contemplation of impermanence.
Yeah, that in Chuji. Kazi 뭔가 보면 메타바이 도마이 바시요 도마이 바시 소이 바이 내가 너마자니 주연나 세체도 메투 파라스 메타바 somebody 카보 스타니바 가지고는 도마도 메타바도 누하도 톰바 나 톰바 다음에 바 지지요와 나한테는 메타바도 카보 어디 로봇 통지 론 트두 깨지 니바 메도바 테마타도 인주라니 데스 동보 뉴마 타니 타 가비 깨지 탐이 봐도 깨지기 제가 집에 나와서 당가서 제는 맛이 봐도 깨지 이제 전 주대를 맞아 지금 깨지니 되면 그거 누지 매 뭔가 탐지 이날 가서 로 신지도 또 밑에 또 맞으면 지인 손대 다티 아주 노란 추비 주做的 자료도 봐. 근데 가서 지와지도 잘 깨지 맞지 던지 롱 tro도 느끼지만 믿어야 되면 그런 생일 깨지는 거 제동 가봐 로 노추바다본 연장 스단데 노다비면 노다 농가는 세라자로 저한테는 로 차장 주로 로트 베테 연장 정지 당연 다관지 로시 가반네바 다 대지면 나저 로인지 찬네 가반네바 알아 리즈니바 가반네베 신도인지네 다고 이용 그건 누지 인편치 깨지미 제가 세배 평화를마다 그 바송에 대해서 그래서 너희들 그런 가바차니 마지 빠져 깨지지 뉴트를 맞지 이건 뒤니드비 누지 시절 메시버 그 바지에 배나 마주동 마음이 쯤었다고 시바라 노자시 마주 주반으로도 깨지 되게 말 나도 뭐 로자를 뭐 대매산 나중에 추진 줄에서 난이 초 달리 초선도 대로 노알 마음에 되면 며칠 채비서는 며칠 그런 깨지깨지 인지되고 가는 어다 마음에 쯤어들 너도 유한으로 빼대다면 시동 늦지 그거 늦지 있으시 탐제다 답답할 막 가요 말 된도 아주 준 가부터 단 메다와서 라고 메다와서 처음 메다면 늦지 깨지면 정도 있는 내가 로자 늦지 투지 깨지면 봐 메다면 있어 로자 신도지지대 통제죠. 도목가바 메신도 통제 가바 차니 지바진도 좀 술 간데서도 술도 시바진 놓고 있어. 근데 그 냐바서도 신놈다 뒤지서도 다다 바지 야가서 야기도 땅가 땅도 그거 시가 대르마지 뒤지는 로안조도 뒤진 주한테는 사원 지신 나서로 좀 통제 주한으로 대 니비 소자 통제 깨지긴 주한으로 되거든 뒤진 주하지 노 로그 류레서도 네 가서 그때 대리 말을 말고 나니 다로도 말 이마지도 로 개제지 주하 대도 가시 마마로 가시 안토그 아 대도 놈이 가시 야 노줄라서 좀 다와 가시 마 그바 가시 대화님을 가시 동안이 올라서 봐 단단 나 줘봐 맞아봐 라도 제나 랑게도 무슨 통화도 용화도 내내 뉴스 투반지 봐라 소바통 진단 소바타라 대선을 통해나 나 손이 누지 탐지 단단 랑게 가건지에 노동 추이 와다고 깨지 좀 추이 추비真来说吧哪个真깨지 되게 뭐 또 소바다就别接了说真的就按那时候出来你把사고 맛이 빠르건 때문에 다음에 초든 아주 로 단지 지금 아주 저저 두고 말 무슨 동전 저거를 가지나 수원도 시험 수시지 대리니도 좀더 셨으면 요를 등 아주 뒤손을 또 맞도 로 단지 공그 어다 다다가 내배 다음에 같이 내서 사시면 멤버 유 잡대도 자기 손으로 손을 공도 때도 로또 봐 신신도 있고 노래 저자트만 놀지 마지 고스는 이제 고는 딱 받은 바 위시 마시 또지 그저 레디산 대든지 아주 특별 제중 동안 연수 등에 로 통해 손을 돈네 로 노노네 뉴아지도 좀 맞이나 건강도 시중에 세빈이 봐 신이 좀 받도라 롱게 요말 제가 집어 답이 건로 주는다 다 야니마 쪼집이 쪼고 세인도 손지수 받는 바 되다 미사할 때 많이 통제를 내내 지지 통제 근데 이제 매번 차대서 용도 손을 좀 같이 하는 거지. 그다음에 그러면 저
After the contemplation on the multiplicity of the 5 aggregates, once the impression on the multiplicity of aggregates fades, then instead of prolonging that impression, what is important is to turn into the shift one's contemplation to the contemplation on impermanence. All entities, once they have come into being, do not remain as they are in the second instant, but undergo immediate change. From the very first moment they arise until their final moment of cessation, they are subject to a continuous process of transformation. It does not matter whether something is like lightning, which disappears in a single instant, or the outer world, which endures for an aeon. As long as it is conditioned, it will pass through a succession of moments during which it arises and ceases anew. Settle in the understanding that everything is similar to a waterfall or the flame of a lamp. Now there is, we need to understand the one fact or the reality, and that is the all conditioned phenomena. The moment they arise, the next moment it ceases. That means it changes. It never remains the same the next moment. And that is something that we need to know. And there is no such phenomenon within the conditioned phenomena that survives or that remains constant for 2 seconds or 2 instances. Because the moment it arises, the next moment it ceases to be. It changes, it transforms. It never remains the same for 2 instances. So that is important to know. Now we might think that like, for example, a kalpa or an eon lasts for an eon lasts for an eon, or the word lasts for some a specific period of time. We might think that these last, but these do not last. All conditioned phenomena do not last. Then why do we actually why do we not understand this, that all conditioned phenomena are momentary? That means it doesn't last more than a moment. Why don't we understand this? Why don't we realize this? And that is because the moments of those conditioned phenomena are so similar. The succeeding moments, the consecutive moments of the conditioned phenomena are so similar that we mistake them to be the same. And therefore, we think that things last. And just as it is said that you can't swim in the same river twice, you don't see the same phenomenon twice. You can't swim in the same river twice because the river has already passed. In the same way, you don't meet the same person twice. It is just a succession of that moment of that person, and the person is not the same as before. It has already transformed. So therefore, we fail to realize the subtle impermanence, the subtle form of impermanence. The subtle form of impermanence is like, just as mentioned, like you can't swim in the same river twice. That means you think that you are swimming in the same river, but you are not swimming. You can't swim in the same river twice because the river in which you have swum is already kind of like ceased to be. The momentariness, we do not really see the momentariness of conditioned phenomena. kechi ki mitapa, that is momentary. The moment it arises, the next moment it ceases to be. Momentary arise, again it ceases to be. So when we see this, when we understand this, then we really understand mitapa, or the impermanence. Now, what do we perceive in terms of how do we relate to impermanence? We only relate to what we call the gross impermanence, like a house falling down, a person dying, an earthquake happening, or a tree falling down, or whatever. So that's what we call the gross impermanence. Gross impermanence is the ceasing of that continuum. Gyun gakbe mitapa. Gyun gakbe mitapa means when you see, when there is the similar successive moments of a particular phenomenon, like a table or like a tree or a house, when these seemingly same phenomenon, successive moments which are so similar, when that ceases to be, and then when the table breaks down, or the house is kind of dismantled, or the tree falls down, then we see that, okay, you know, something has perished, something is no more, right? The person is no more, and so forth. And that is only what we call the rakpe mitapa, which is the gross impermanence. Gross impermanence is relatable to us, whereas the subtle impermanence is not relatable to us. Subtle impermanence is such that even though you see, you perceive the thing as same, which has already gone through subtle change, you know, momentary change. And when we fail to perceive that, then we feel that, okay, we will stay for another year, we will stay for a long time, and then we still have time. We still have time to practice Dharma, and we still have time to prepare for our death and for our next life, and so forth. And that actually fools us. And that is what we call ignorance, not knowing the subtle impermanence. Because of this permanence, clinging to things as remaining or staying put there, that actually applies to our life also. We feel that, okay, we are going to live, you know, at least many years, you know, and then as a result of that, we feel that we still have time, and that's why, you know, there's the sense of urgency to practice Dharma is not there, and that's why we always keep postponing things. And that actually fools us, that actually dilutes us. Just as, so as a reminder, one great master said that you never know whether you die tomorrow, because, you know, anything can happen because of being impermanent, because of being subtly impermanent. And therefore, like right away, now itself is the time to practice Dhamma when you are alive. Tomorrow is like unreliable. Whether we will see tomorrow or not is like really unreliable, really uncertain. Meditate, and then further meditate on how all worlds, environment and inhabitants alike are formed and ultimately perish, on the passing of the 4 seasons in the external world. So we have, like right now we have spring and summer, and then we have winter, and then summer, and then autumn, and then winter. So this kind of constant change. On the face of life and changes in circumstance, youth and old age, high and low status, happiness and sorrow, that beings must pass through. Consider your own experience, what you have witnessed and heard concerning others. Meditate in these various ways until you develop clear certainty that all things, conditioned things, resemble flashes of lightning, bubbles on water, or clouds. So momentariness.
Yeah, that any metabolic do no imba. Toba de go yabana data to meet you, not switching. Keji Medeba, Yubi, Sujin do Jubi. Saji Pumbundara, Sabonga Chobanda, Siena. De Jundo Roba Pashu, Keji Reri Chani Chong. 다다 동하를 인도 용자 동하 심한 줄로 전나다 동하지 마소도 니들들 계지 대용어 대화다 나양 계지 가신 주주와 사지 대화 통지 동하인데 사대 주와제 네바네 주비 동하 다다 대화다 나서 다 사지 노양 대화 통지 대화 딴 증거를 더 동하이 말 대화 다다 내용 도금 또뇽동 롱대 소대도 공용대 단다 롱 줄라 두하 제제 준 빼나 동대 대비 독신지 세진도 코발레스나 너다 나서 동 여자도 대키로 어다 너지 동하지 줄 마주비 깨지 좀 매대 사실 대화 통지 그지 나만 때니 심한 주미셔 다들 동하이 바 가서 고니 쉬어다지 마미 깨지 깨종 그지 맞은 마로나 드리브지와라 케이시에 셔 케이시에 셔 깨지 맞지니 그저 배나데 세고 찍도 그자 니시소도 차지라 깨지면 차와자로 그래서 대라동 동하기 시와지제 주임을 쳐르 단단된 도지 레가바도 제바도 도지 탐지 동하데 대따라 공원에 시바도 동안주도 차반도지도 찌르바동 제바 강아지도 콩 섬지 두비 사치지 생나 대시라 자치머린도 콩 섬지 너는 냐와 나베도 요 습점이 봐도 콩 섬지 두빈 두지 탐지 사치지 부모님 땅오 가르사 배는 매우 내봤다 무서운 담다 동하지 진이도 내가 때문에 로지 마성을 봐도 너서 땅 아다 대다 동아이 비슷도 라벨 넣어서 동지 제용 딱 가서 네 시비들 시원하지 내가 자동이다这种 동조 공동체 매저 지가 나지 삼다지 슬라인데 저희가 이 동화 나서 왔다 리주 소주 동화 차라대시 여러분 동화 나지 마셔다 동화 시에도 셔다 된도 소소 동화동 랑게 이라 건 젬발라스와 랑 젠세도 메르비터 동화전 노바 랑 나비 메긴 통화도 나비 투바라스와 요두주바 고용 로마소라 소나도데 로 공차 대화세네 고를도 모뉴는 게바 매바 스바 고정 그보단 집이 동화전 노바 최종은 타다 저다 네바진도 소나 아다 대답이 동화 노선 나서 총모바 즈면서도 즈바까와 따때 가지자를 내가 가지고서도 나 파노 맛을 봐도 주니도 말고서도 파노 맛을 봐도 연이 연도 레지 많이 세반에 봐지 좀 세 종에 봤는데 답은네 사지 공부 그런 답을 잡았으니 예발에 보부 준 들리 좋아오 년도 로기다 사지 부부디 전송을 잡아 때니 말이지 봐도 솔로도 너셔 땅니 몇소 여기 체니 너저 동안 내시 좋아 샤오
Once we have contemplated on the impermanent nature of the five aggregates of all conditioned phenomena, then we move on to the third aspect of the nature of the five aggregates, and that is suffering. When the momentum of this notion on impermanence fades, investigate once more these tainted aggregates, the assemblies of various elements in constant flux which never remain static even for an instant. Consider how, leaving aside their continuity and the coarser level of appearance, even in each passing moment, experiences of pain constitute the suffering of suffering. Whereas moments that seem to have the nature of happiness are still liable to cease at any time, and thus, being part of a constantly evolving stream, constitute the suffering of change. No matter whether you experience happiness, suffering, or equanimity in the present moment, still it is as if you have eaten poisonous food. There is not a single moment of experience that will not become a cause of future suffering. It is on the basis of earlier moments that subsequent moments arise. If previous moments were somehow incomplete, this would obstruct the arising of their effects. All moments, therefore, function as causes for future suffering, and that thus constitute the suffering of conditioning. So in this paragraph, Rinpoche points out the three main, the nature of suffering, especially of the aggregates, the nature of suffering of samsara. And when we talk about suffering, we should not get confused. Suffering, when you talk about suffering, it is not confined. It is not just confined, just limited. It is not just limited to the sensation of pain. It has a much more deeper meaning when we talk about suffering. Suffering is more relatable for us because it is a painful situation, whether it's physical pain or mental pain. That is what we call suffering of suffering, or one suffering upon another. Like some tragedy happens, one tragedy happens, and before you actually get over with that tragedy, another tragedy happens, and that is what we call suffering upon suffering, or suffering of suffering. And then the other facet of suffering is, this is something that is not so relatable to us, but this is so. This is the nature of the experience that we have, and that is the pleasurable experiences that we have in life. All these pleasurable experiences are what we call suffering in nature, because they are momentary, they are subject to change, and they can be causes of future suffering. And so therefore the pleasurable experiences of samsara are likened to poisonous food. So the food might be delicious. It might be delicious momentarily. Then what happens is, but since this is poison, with poison, it will harm us, and it will harm us. It can cost our life. So therefore, pleasurable experiences are suffering, what we call the suffering of change, because they are subject to change. They can be a cause of future suffering. And then the most subtle of the suffering is the suffering of conditioning. That is what we call the underlying factor of all the experiences, whether it is pleasurable, neutral, or painful. And that is what we call suffering of conditioning, the momentariness. The momentariness and being the causes of future suffering. Reflect on how the defiled aggregates included within the three realms related to these three types of suffering, until you are certain that the aggregates are the basis for suffering and is similar to a pit of fire or filthy swamp. So in the three realms, desire, form, and formless realm, which can be divided into, three of them can be divided into what we call the 6 realms of samsara. The specific suffering of the 6 realms of samsara, for example, suffering of suffering mainly in the 3 lower realms of existence, in hell realm, hungry ghost realm, and animal realm. Hell realm undergoes suffering of heat, extreme heat and cold. Hungry ghosts of extreme hunger and thirst, and animals of extreme stupidity and being exploited. And in the human world and demigod realm, what is actually and also in some of the God realm, what is experienced is, of course, suffering is there, but mainly the suffering of change, that is pleasurable experiences which are subject to change, which can be cause of the future suffering, which are causes of the future suffering. And then in the God realm, specifically in the form and formless realm, the suffering of conditioning is there, because they don't go through a suffering of change and suffering of suffering. So wherever we are born, whether it is in the higher realms of existence or lower realms of existence, we can't kind of escape from these different types of suffering. And therefore, they are a bit like a pit of fire or filthy swamp. In addition, contemplate the individual suffering of the 6 classes of beings, such as the intense heat and cold of hells, the aspect and all the aspect of suffering you have seen or heard about, including the pain you have experienced directly. The sequence and duration of the reflection are not predetermined. You should simply reflect as much as you can on all the various major and minor forms of suffering within existence. Recognize that these different forms of suffering, which are so difficult to bear, will continue to arise again and again without end until the noble path is reached. Recognize too that they all emerge from the stream of tainted aggregates that are the basis of grasping. Continue this reflection until a recognition of their inherent faults arises from deep within and you develop certain conviction. So reflect on the suffering until you develop certain conviction.
Maybe shoot you to say that something do not do they shoot your on it. Not do change go some of them. Nami Sheba Kazana Tomai Baton, Madaba Jabton, Dunghama Smooth, Trombe, Nishaji, Duji Pumabo. 저기 보면 소위 보면 두지 보면 메다 바동 권시마도 도마동 동합에 ranji 진들라 나주 메디 나오 다 안지거로 고사금 다금 나오 녀바 르로니 대 로신지로 제때 또 세지 전제도 손아도네 가지고 시마다 바지도 바지 하고 또 차서만 도마이 바 초반이만 맞아 이제 남에 되었지. 아단데 근데라 다금 고사금 나시 뭐니 주바 간요 무두고 녀도 로지 담매주 간 시에 먹어 버체니 어디 다스 손어가 저기 나 손은 통성이 차송아요 되는 메스 저면 봐 메 오모 사빈 너나 네비 Pena Taksala Tapa to another Mesaba Meding to Murara Saba, called Drum Tung. Then a Tapati the drum Mebani the Shiva Tatu was buried. Then the Jay the Tonje Turubaton, Shibitsu Tonje Kejimi, Junto Chobi, Pumotona, Mata Maseba, no Taseto Mazabim. Dado. 딱맞잖아. 르 파단이 잡아서 맞아 봐. 다음에 봐. 렌두 섬이 싫어든 미기 도안주를 나 다음에 또 손을 내 대바치로 도망은 딱 거기 습 조를 거발치비 니보 매듭으로 봐. 요나 뒤쪽에 차도 차도 나네 내 통통 이로 싫은 통 다음에 또 도와 있어.
Remain in the state of mind that this certainty induces for as long as it has momentum. So the certainty on the suffering nature of the aggregates. And then when the force of notion begins to fade, consider these 5 conditioned aggregates, which through the certainty that the 3 investigations carried out so far has elicited are now understood to be impermanent, multiple, and painful by nature. the three investigations that we have done so far is on how the aggregates are a multiplicity and how they are impermanent and how they are suffering in nature. When we have gained certainty in these three through this contemplation on these three different types of nature of the aggregates, then we move on to the next contemplation. Although we presume that these aggregates constitute a person or a self in relation to which we think I am, they have no such inherently existent self, person, or I whatsoever. Reflect on this and consider how you would recognize the absence of snake in a mortal robe in plain sight, and how similarly the eyes of intelligence may perceive the absence of a self in what are merely aggregates composed of assembled particles and successive moments labeled as a self only where there is no investigation or analysis. So now coming to the reflection on contemplation on the self. Now, when we talk about suffering, we have this the natural thought, the notion that I'm happy and I'm not happy, I'm feeling pain and so forth. And then the very thought that there is a self in me, there is a self in me, that there is this inherently existent self in me, is something that we all have it. And however, we really do not go deeper into that notion, trying to understand that notion, and we presume and we assume as though it is there, substantially, inherently existent, and we don't go further than that. So if we really want to know the true nature of ourselves, then the situation demands that we really try to see who this person is, whether this person, the I that we kind of cherish so much, whether this exists in us or not, truly exists in us or not. And when this investigation is done, then when this reflection is done through this, using the aforementioned three investigation, the multiplicity of the aggregates, the impermanence of the aggregates, and the suffering nature of the aggregates, then we finally come to know that there is no such person that exists in the way that we consider, we think to exist. And that is a delusion. And that delusion is like, looking at a rope and having the feeling that this is a snake. When there's darkness around and there's on the road, there's a rope lying there. And all of a sudden, when things are not so clear, then we take it to be snake and we get frightened and we even cry, shout that there is a snake. But when we actually get a light and we actually come to know that this is a rope, this is a mortal rope, and it is, the snake does not exist there. In the same way, we assume and we presume that the I or the self exists in these aggregates substantially. And based on that, then we kind of like, we go through all the experiences and we collect and we gather all kinds of habitual tendencies upon it. And when we do the investigation, when we reflect on whether this person actually exists in the first place, substantially in the aggregates, through the investigation of multiplicity and impermanence and painful, then we come to know that this is just an illusion, a delusion. It is just like grasping upon a rope as a snake, where the snake does not exist there. So how similarly the eyes of intelligence may perceive the absence of a self and what are merely aggregates. So when we try to look where the self is in the aggregates, then we found that aggregates are multiple. It is not a single. And then naturally, we'll find that there's no self as we thought it to exist.
Oh, yeah, that is the images and the Tibachizo Tonji. Launch of the Dame images. You know, June di Chishula, they could not suddenly Guba. Sheban Hamasum said, Tomato, Madabaton, Dunhasum of the Shibi, suddenly zombies. Shima de Dame Bate, shoot to Chubade, June di Chishis, Kame Badelato, so Nuba Yimbis. They don't Dame being Nishi, Majapa the gums, Dame, Kondishiban, Dame, Nishi Majapa the gums. You all know to change you will go someone. Table no table, son of Metova. Namata, Pumbo Toman, La Tajitan. Is Zonde. Wrong Santo, Lodola, Shagom G's, Ramajin Majivich, Shagom Jeremy, me by Reni, Red, Toma Twainba, the name Medaba, they don't know. Really, Santo, touch about the gums. They're wrong to Sonato. Ray Cabrera, Ronju Pumbo, Susonatoni, wrong Dabujata, she do Sovisimbi, Pumonga Tachi Tons. Ray Yaji, do Tadever, Jen Tachi Tons. Ray on Duji Tonji, Dujin, Tushabin, Duji, Silla something. Silla Siba. This somebody wrong lola, Gazet to the Conde Shas. Then it to do her. Taman. That the Shagum Koloma Gombal Tenny. Give at him. Thomas Sanjigo and Sanji Tomjit and the Miju is at him. They told them. Jumapa which then Chimalasaba. They done who are searching washings. That the one of songs not better. Non Judy go to the York no Jim. Give a mugging to run was about that to singing or turn to a new one. Or the other shame there. There's a watching. They look by on the jars. You want to Jenny, Condishiba Dublin. Shubin Kuro, Pama Sheba. You only own the Sora Kune. Run on dog with the Terra Command, see the come to my statue. Take on the Metoma Chenny. Pena Sakomo and Chibi. Me Chibi Sudo. Sakomo, Zuma Soba, some chin Pandra, or the Gove. Rogan miss it, Temed or Meba. Damage not to change a Kokapchi Majibachin. Or the Junjinis songs. Pavaso, Yon Kakaso, long nannies, a ton chenetas. Lucet ton chene, Commodore Chilum, ton cheba Jonani, Chilum Masoba, Hede Chede Lurs. Mesochas.
So the concept or the reality of selflessness is the fundamental concept and view which is common to both the foundational vehicle and the Mahayana. And this is very important because this is kind of the most important aspect of the path, and that the view of selflessness, understanding of selflessness, and contemplating and meditating on it. Generally speaking, selflessness is the most important point to realize. Still, this does not mean that it should be the exclusive focus, since emphasizing the three preceding investigations makes it easier to understand the final one. This is to say, the momentum that they bring removes some of the difficulty. Here too, you should meditate. Do not fall prey to their influence, but carry out the analysis once again, beginning with the multiplicity of the aggregates. So the important thing that we need to know here is what is the speciality of these texts. Normally, when we talk about selflessness, we consider this view of selflessness to the most important, the highest, most profound view within the sutra teachings. But the specialty of this particular text is that when you do the investigation on multiplicity, impermanence, suffering, then indirectly, these investigation, the first three investigation will help you to land up in understanding and realization of the fourth view or the fourth nature, which is the selflessness. So that's the specialty of this text, because in the Madhyamika text, there's so much emphasis on the meditation and contemplation of selflessness. And sometimes when we go directly into selflessness, it is difficult for us to understand and to relate to. So therefore, the meditation and contemplation on analysis on multiplicity and impermanence and suffering nature really help us indirectly and easily to the level of what we call the view of selflessness. So that's why this text is special. Meditate by focusing on each stage in turn and ensuring that you reach a decisive understanding of every point. Sometimes investigate your own aggregates, sometimes analyze the aggregates of others, and sometimes consider conditioned phenomena in general. Practice whichever of these three forms of analysis you prefer. So you can do the meditation depending on your preference also. Like, doesn't mean that you have to always start with multiplicity. You can start with impermanence, you can start with suffering, and you can start with selflessness. But what is important is to do it repeatedly. That's why it's called wheel of analytical meditation. Wheel means like continuous kind of analysis. And an object of the investigation can sometimes be your own body or others' body, and also sometimes even like conditioned phenomena in general without kind of any specific kind of object. Dedicate the virtue at the end. So when you conclude it, just as you began with bodhicitta, thinking of all sentient beings, in the same way, when we conclude, then dedication should be done at the end, and then rest in natural ease. If you are practicing in multiple sessions, try to keep the level of analysis turning without interruption, like wildfire spreading through grass, so that there is no opportunity for other superficial thoughts to intervene. So when we do this analytical meditation, one after another, first multiplicity, then impermanence, then suffering, then selflessness, again back to multiplicity, and so on and so forth, there is no kind of like room. There will be no room for superficial thoughts that kind of like which are opposite, which are opposite or which are far away from reality, like considering aggregates as singular or permanent or blissful or with self. So therefore these superficial thoughts will have no room for them to arise. Should you grow mentally tired or fatigued, allow yourself simply to relax without contemplating anything at all. If contemplating anything at all. So when you become tired, when you get tired, then you relax, simply relax without doing the contemplation. So we will conclude today's session here, because we have run out of time, and the remaining section of this particular, the supplementary text as well as the main text, will be completed tomorrow. And I think we'll try to find some time for Q&A, hopefully. And then today's session we will conclude here, and then we can do the dedication now. Tone nyebe danam pamje shi keva naji balon tuba yi sibe tsone dowa dowa sho rinchen keva dowa kun tado dame juda rashin de nyenzo ba taji ne chunga robe si tenze varsho dian yinde ki poshin chobe tado kundu Rode ben no rado jeje sanje temba tashin jeba sho
Sanje nyemban bema samba ve rin lo de men dong ha yung ram jia cer ne te dang san be nye lin ji gom zong xie ran be la ren ba yi lei song dun jie ding bong ke be ta人因老生老了点准备就，街上些人的真感动呢，见个这些等的是什么？跟着要没老生早晚的，南阳马路准备让到手。别把灯连盆连着上面，这些这是能不全做全就三九人不去。马杰巴南坚决前，前巴娘巴面巴扬，红莲黄灯个瓦熊。
May Bodhicitta, the precious and supreme mind, arise in whom it has not yet arisen. Where it has arisen, may it not decline, but ever increase higher and higher.
Tujiche Khenchen Rinpoche Kutsisha Beten. Merci beaucoup. Dankeschön.
Thank you.
Lozawa spasiba. And come on. Shishini. Gracias. I forget. Par días. And Dziękuję. Dziękuję bardzo. Grazie.
So Katrinche, Khenchen Pema Shrab Rinpoche, Tuktsetse, Sanim Jelyong. Thank you, Khenpo La. Thank you, all translators. Thank you so much for coming today, everybody. And we will see each other very happy tomorrow at the same time. So 9 a.m. the Central European time. Thank you so much. Katrinche, Tashidele.
Thank you. See you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow. Now you're going to beach for lunch. Thank you.
Thank you.
Obrigado.
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 Obrigado, obrigado.
Thank you, Rinpoche. Thank you.
Ευχαριστώ πολύ.
Dziękuję, dziękuję. Aci. Par días. Come on.